The office was quiet except for the soft tapping of keyboards and the hum of computers. Among the rows of desks sat Daniel, his focus fixed on the screen in front of him. He wasn't the loud type. He didn't brag about his work or try to get attention. He just did his job well, day after day, always trying to make things a little better. Most people liked him, though some thought he was too quiet. But his manager, Mr. Collins, didn't like him much at all. Mr. Collins was the kind of manager who liked to be the smartest person in the room. He enjoyed giving orders and making sure everyone knew he was in charge. When Daniel joined the company, he had big ideas about how to make things run smoother. He noticed problems in the system and tried to suggest small improvements, but every time he spoke up, Collins would cut him off. "We've been doing it this way for years," he'd say sharply. "You just stick to your work." The message was clear: keep quiet and do what you're told. Even so, Daniel kept working hard. He came in early, stayed late, and often helped his coworkers without expecting anything in return. He believed that if you did good work, people would notice eventually. But weeks turned into months and no one did. Collins continued taking credit for team achievements, especially the ones that came from Daniel's ideas. It wasn't fair, but Daniel didn't want to cause trouble. He just told himself to keep going. One Friday morning, everything changed. The team had just finished a big project for an important client. Daniel had worked the hardest on it, staying up late several nights to make sure every detail was right. The client was happy and it looked like a success. But during the presentation meeting, something went wrong with the report file. The numbers on one page didn't match, and Collins immediately turned red with anger. "Who worked on this section?" he demanded. Everyone looked around, unsure what to say. Daniel spoke up softly. "That was my part, sir. But I double-checked everything." There might have been a software error. Before he could finish, Collins slammed his hand on the table. "A software error? Do you think I'm stupid? You made a careless mistake and embarrassed me in front of the client." Daniel tried to explain, but Collins didn't want to listen. His voice got louder. "I've had enough of your excuses. You think you're smarter than everyone, but you're not. Pack your things and you're fired." The room went silent. No one dared to say a word. Daniel sat frozen for a few seconds, not because of the shouting, but because of the shock. Fired? For one small mistake? He looked around at his coworkers. Some looked down, others just avoided eye contact. No one wanted to get involved. After a few seconds, Daniel stood up calmly. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just said, "All right, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." Then he walked out of the meeting room, leaving behind the echo of Collins's angry voice. He returned to his desk quietly. His coworkers watched him pack his few things: a notebook, a framed photo of his parents, and a small plant he'd kept by the window. A few people came by and whispered, "I'm sorry," or "You didn't deserve that," but he just smiled faintly and said, "It's okay." He shook a few hands, thanked everyone, and left. As he stepped outside, the cool air hit his face. For the first time in months, he felt free, though he didn't know whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. He had no job now, no income, and no plan. But deep inside, there was a strange sense of calm. Maybe, he thought, this was a sign to start over. That evening, he sat alone in his small apartment. He stared at his laptop screen, going over his savings. It wasn't much, just enough to last a few months if he was careful. He thought about looking for another job, but something in him hesitated. He remembered all the times Collins ignored his ideas that could have helped the company grow. He thought, maybe it was time to do something different. Maybe it was time to build something of his own. Months earlier, Daniel had been working on a side project, a software tool that made it easier for teams to manage their tasks online. He had built it just for fun in his spare time, never thinking it could become anything serious. Now, as he sat there in silence, that small project felt like his only hope. He opened his laptop, scrolled through the old code, and smiled slightly. "Maybe I can make this work," he whispered to himself. The next few weeks were hard. Without a job, every day felt uncertain. He would wake up early, work on his project for hours, and take short breaks to save electricity. Some nights he barely slept. There were moments when he felt like giving up, especially when the program crashed or a feature wouldn't work. But every time he wanted to quit, he remembered the look on Collins's face when he was fired, that mix of arrogance and disbelief. And it gave him a strange kind of motivation. Slowly, the software began to take shape. He added new features, fixed bugs, and tested it with a few friends. One of them, Lena, worked as a software engineer at another firm. When she saw what Daniel was building, she was impressed. "You should keep going," she told him. "This could actually help companies manage their teams better." Her encouragement meant a lot. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like someone believed in him. But even with progress, life was tough. Bills piled up. He had to sell a few things just to buy groceries and pay rent. There were nights when he sat in the dark because he couldn't afford to keep the lights on. Yet through all that, he never stopped working. He told himself, "If I can survive this, I can survive anything." Sometimes he'd take long walks just to clear his head. He'd pass by office buildings filled with busy people and wonder if anyone in there knew what it felt like to start from nothing. Most people never saw how much effort went into building something new. They only noticed success once it became visible. One afternoon, after months of testing, Daniel finally launched the first version of his software online. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. He posted about it on a small tech forum, not expecting much. But to his surprise, a few people tried it and left positive feedback. One user even said, "This tool saved me hours of work." That single comment made all the sleepless nights worth it. Days turned into weeks and more people started using it. Slowly, the downloads increased. Daniel couldn't believe it. Something he built alone in his apartment was now helping real companies work better. It wasn't just an app anymore, it was the start of something real. Still, he stayed humble. He didn't brag or post big success stories. He just kept improving the software, fixing small issues, and adding better tools. Deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. He didn't have investors, a team, or a fancy office. Just a dream and the determination to see it through. Sometimes, late at night, he'd think about his old office. He'd picture Collins giving orders, treating people the same way he treated him. The thought didn't make him angry anymore. Instead, it made him smile. Because now Daniel wasn't stuck under someone else's command. He was free to build, to create, to lead in his own way. He didn't know where this journey would take him yet, but one thing was clear. Getting fired might have been the best thing that ever happened to him. What felt like an ending that day in the conference room was actually the beginning of a story that no one, not even Collins, could have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel kept working on his small software project. His apartment had become his office, his kitchen table, his desk, and the sound of typing his only company. He didn't have fancy equipment or a big team, just his laptop, a notebook filled with ideas, and a heart full of quiet determination. Money was tight. He lived carefully, cutting down on every expense he could. Some days he'd skip lunch just to make his groceries last a little longer. His savings were running low, but he refused to give up. Every morning, he told himself, "If I can just keep going one more day, maybe things will start to change." The software he was building wasn't just any tool. It was something born from his own experiences. The long hours, the confusion in team tasks, the poor communication he'd seen at his old job. He wanted to fix that. He wanted to create something that made work easier, fairer, and more organized for people like him. Still, progress was slow. He'd spend hours fixing one problem only to find two more, but he didn't mind the struggle. It made him feel alive again. When he hit a wall, he'd take short walks around the block watching people rush by with their busy lives. He'd remind himself that every successful story started from a small, invisible beginning. One evening, after working for nearly 12 hours straight, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. His screen was filled with lines of code and his eyes burned with fatigue. But just then his phone buzzed. It was a message from Lena, the friend who had encouraged him earlier. "How's the project coming along?" she wrote. "Tough," Daniel replied. "Feels like I'm climbing a mountain barefoot." Lena sent back a laughing emoji. "Good, that means it's worth it. Want to hop on a call? Maybe I can help with some code issues." They talked for hours. She walked him through a few ideas to simplify the design, helped him fix some bugs, and by the end of the night, the program was running smoother than ever. Before hanging up, Lena said, "You know, Daniel, this could actually become something big. Don't underestimate yourself." Her words stuck with him. He went to bed that night feeling a bit lighter, even hopeful. Over the next few months, Daniel and Lena worked together whenever they could. She had her own job, but she always found time to test new updates or share feedback. Slowly, the app began to take shape. They named it FlowTrack, a simple but powerful system for managing team projects. It could track tasks, share updates in real time, and even send smart reminders to avoid missed deadlines. It wasn't flashy, but it worked beautifully. Then came the hardest part, getting people to notice it. Daniel knew that even the best ideas could be ignored if no one saw them. So he started reaching out to small companies, offering them free trials. Most ignored his messages, but a few agreed to try it. He stayed in touch with them, listened to their problems, and made changes quickly. One by one, those small clients started spreading the word. By the end of the year, something amazing happened. A medium-sized firm decided to fully adopt FlowTrack for their entire team. It was Daniel's first real contract. When he saw the confirmation email, he couldn't stop smiling. He walked around his apartment laughing softly to himself, not out of arrogance, but out of disbelief. After all the rejection and sleepless nights, something was finally working. With that contract money, Daniel was able to upgrade his equipment, rent a small shared office, and bring on a part-time assistant. He worked harder than ever, but felt more alive than he ever had under his old manager. Every line of code he wrote carried meaning. Every client he talked to reminded him that he was building something that mattered. One afternoon, while checking his email, Daniel received a message from a company that wanted to partner with him. The sender was polite and professional, and at the bottom of the message was a familiar name, his old company. He froze for a moment, staring at the screen. It turned out that his former company was struggling with remote work organization, and they wanted to test his software. For a few seconds, Daniel didn't know what to do. The memory of that day he got fired flashed in his mind. The shouting, the humiliation, the silence in that room. But then he took a deep breath and smiled faintly. This is business, he told himself. It's not about revenge. It's about growth. He replied politely, offering them a demo and pricing details. Days later, he joined a virtual meeting with their management team. Collins wasn't there. It was handled by one of the project heads. But just seeing the company logo again gave Daniel an odd mix of nostalgia and pride. The meeting went well. They liked the system and agreed to a trial run. As soon as it ended, Daniel leaned back and laughed quietly. The same place that once kicked him out now needed his help. The next few months were busy. More companies started using FlowTrack. Daniel and Lena had to hire 2 new developers to keep up with demand. His small idea was turning into a real business. Investors started noticing too. One venture firm reached out, interested in funding his company to expand internationally. Daniel couldn't believe it. He remembered the nights he sat in darkness worrying about rent. Now he was discussing million-dollar deals, but through it all he stayed humble. He kept his team small, treated everyone with respect, and made sure no one felt ignored like he once did. One morning, he met with a group of potential investors over coffee. They listened as he explained his vision for the company, to make teamwork simpler and fairer no matter the size of the business. One investor smiled and said, "You have something special here. We're interested in helping you grow." The deal went through and suddenly everything changed. FlowTrack moved into a real office space, a bright, modern place filled with natural light and friendly energy. Daniel hired new staff, built departments, and created a culture of kindness and transparency. Everyone had a voice. Everyone mattered. Sometimes during meetings, he'd watch his team brainstorm freely, exchanging ideas without fear, and it would remind him of all those times he was silenced at his old job. He promised himself that no one working under him would ever feel that small. As the company grew, so did its reputation. Tech magazines started mentioning FlowTrack as one of the fastest-growing management platforms of the year. News outlets wanted interviews. Daniel wasn't comfortable being in the spotlight, but he agreed to a few. In one interview, a journalist asked, "What motivated you to start all this?" Daniel thought for a moment and said simply, "I wanted to build a place where people are heard. That's all." The interviewer smiled. "Was there a moment that pushed you to take the leap?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I lost a job I really cared about. But that loss became my turning point." That quote ended up spreading online. People related to his story. The quiet worker who was fired unfairly but turned his pain into purpose. His story inspired many to chase their own ideas, to believe that failure could be the start of something beautiful. One night, long after everyone had gone home, Daniel stayed at the office. He looked out the window at the city lights, remembering how far he'd come. From being fired with nothing to his name, to running a company that now helped thousands of people. He smiled to himself. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about proving that kindness, patience, and perseverance could still win in a world that often overlooked them. And deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. What he didn't know yet was that his old company was about to make a decision that would bring his story full circle in a way no one could have predicted. The next year brought more change than Daniel could have imagined. His company, FlowTrack, was growing fast. Every month, new clients signed up and word about his software spread quietly but steadily. It was no longer a small startup built from his apartment. It was becoming a name people in the business world started to respect. Daniel stayed humble through it all. He still came to work before everyone else and left after everyone had gone home. He knew how hard success was to earn, and he didn't want to lose focus. His small team had grown into more than 30 employees now, each one motivated and treated fairly. He made sure of that. Everyone had a voice in meetings and ideas were always welcomed, something he never experienced at his old job. Meanwhile, somewhere across town, Daniel's former company wasn't doing so well. The once busy office that had fired him was now struggling to keep up with the new wave of competition. They had lost several big clients, their technology was outdated, and many employees had left. The board members were becoming impatient. They wanted new direction, someone who could lead the company into the modern digital world. Mr. Collins, who had once walked through the halls with confidence, was now feeling the pressure. Sales were dropping, and employees complained that his leadership style was too strict and outdated. He often lost his temper in meetings, blaming others for the company's problems. But deep down he knew the truth. The company had fallen behind because they had ignored innovation, the same innovation he once dismissed when it came from Daniel. One Monday morning, a board meeting was called. The directors gathered around a long wooden table, their faces serious. Collins tried to stay calm as they discussed the company's poor performance. One of the directors said, "We can't keep doing things the old way. The market has changed. We need someone new to lead us, someone who understands technology and people." Collins shifted uncomfortably. "Are you saying you want to replace me?" he asked. The room went silent for a moment. Then another director cleared his throat. "We're saying the company needs a fresh start. We're exploring options, including merging with another firm that has the tools and leadership we need." Collins frowned. "And which firm is that?" The director opened a file. "It's a growing software company called FlowTrack. They have an innovative platform that's becoming quite popular in our industry." Collins blinked in confusion. The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't place it immediately. "FlowTrack?" he repeated. "Never heard of them." "You will soon," the director replied. "Their founder is young, smart, and has built something remarkable in just 2 years. We've already reached out to discuss a possible merger." Collins didn't say much after that. He left the meeting feeling uneasy. His pride stung. The idea of merging with another company, especially a smaller one, didn't sit well with him. He had spent years climbing to the top, and now it felt like everything was slipping away. A few weeks later, Daniel received an email from an investment group. It was about a potential merger between FlowTrack and his old company. The proposal was detailed. They wanted to combine resources, modernize their systems using FlowTrack's platform, and bring Daniel in as the new CEO of the merged firm. For a long moment, Daniel just stared at the screen, speechless. His heart beat faster. The same company that had once thrown him out without a second thought was now asking for his leadership. He leaned back in his chair, took a deep breath, and smiled quietly. Life, it seemed, had a strange sense of timing. He didn't reply right away. He wanted to think carefully. It wasn't about revenge. He didn't care about humiliating anyone, but the opportunity to make something bigger, to bring his ideas to a place that had once refused to listen, felt meaningful. After a day of thought, he wrote back, "I'm interested. Let's meet." A week later, Daniel walked into a tall glass building for the first round of merger discussions. The air smelled of fresh coffee and paperwork. He was dressed neatly in a navy suit, calm and composed. Across the table sat the board members of his old company. Some of them recognized him immediately. Their faces showed quiet surprise. One whispered something to another, but no one said it aloud. The meeting went smoothly. Daniel presented his vision, a future where both companies could work together with innovation, fairness, and modern technology. He spoke with confidence but also with kindness. There was no arrogance, only purpose. By the end of the meeting, the board was impressed. One director said, "We believe you're exactly the kind of leader we've been looking for." The merger moved forward quickly after that. Legal teams handled contracts, investors shook hands, and within a few months the two companies officially became one. The announcement was made publicly. FlowTrack merges with Harrison & Cumming, Daniel Reed appointed as Chief Executive Officer. When the news broke, it spread through offices, industry networks, and social media. Employees at Daniel's old company couldn't believe it. The man they had seen fired in silence was now returning as their new CEO. Some cheered quietly. Others felt nervous, especially Collins. At the old company's headquarters, the staff gathered to hear the news in person. Collins tried to act calm, pretending the decision didn't bother him, but everyone could see the tension on his face. He had no idea that Daniel himself would soon be walking through those doors again, not as an employee this time, but as the one in charge. Meanwhile, Daniel stayed grounded. When his team congratulated him, he simply smiled and said, "We still have a lot of work to do. This is just another beginning." He wasn't focused on titles or power. He cared more about creating a place where people worked with trust and respect. On the morning of his official introduction as CEO, Daniel arrived early. He stood for a moment outside the building that had once made him feel small and unwanted. The same glass doors, the same gray lobby, but this time everything felt different. He took a slow breath and walked inside, his heart steady. The staff gathered in the main hall for the big announcement. Collins stood near the front, trying to keep his composure. The board members stepped onto the stage, thanking everyone for attending. Then the director said, "It's time to introduce our new CEO, someone who has built an incredible company from the ground up. Please welcome Daniel Reed." The room went completely silent as Daniel walked out from behind the curtain. For a moment, no one moved. Collins' eyes widened, his face pale. The same man he had once fired was now standing in front of him as his new boss. The silence broke into whispers and then, surprisingly, applause. Some employees even smiled. They remembered Daniel as the calm, hard-working man who never complained. Daniel stood at the podium, looked around the room, and smiled warmly. "It's good to be back," he said softly. The crowd laughed lightly, easing the tension. He continued, "This company gave me my first opportunity, and even though my time here didn't end well, I never stopped believing in what we could build. Now we have a chance to make something even better, together." His words carried no bitterness. There was only sincerity. Even Collins, standing in the front row, couldn't look him in the eyes. When Daniel finished speaking, the room filled with applause again, louder this time. For the employees, it felt like hope had finally returned. As Daniel stepped off the stage, Collins finally approached him, looking nervous and unsure. "Daniel," he began quietly, "I didn't expect this." Daniel looked at him with a gentle expression. "Life surprises us sometimes," he said. "Let's focus on what comes next." Collins nodded slowly, his pride fading into something else. Respect, maybe even regret. Daniel didn't dwell on it. He just turned toward his team, ready to begin a new chapter. The man who had once been fired for speaking up was now leading the very place that silenced him. Not for revenge, but for change. The news of Daniel becoming the new CEO spread through the building like wildfire. People couldn't stop talking about it. Some were surprised, others were quietly happy. Many remembered how he had been treated before, how he was fired without a chance to defend himself. Now the same man was walking through the halls, not as a junior employee, but as the one leading everyone. That morning, the company lobby was filled with a mix of nervousness and curiosity. Employees lined up along the corridors trying to catch a glimpse of their new CEO. Some whispered to each other, wondering how Daniel would treat those who had once ignored him. But when he arrived, his face carried no anger, no arrogance, and only calmness and a quiet confidence. Daniel stopped to greet the receptionist, the same woman who once gave him his termination letter years ago. She looked flustered, unsure of what to say, but he smiled kindly. "It's good to see you again," he said gently. Her eyes softened with relief as she replied, "Welcome back, sir." As he walked through the offices, people stood up from their desks, unsure whether to shake hands or stay seated. Daniel made it easy for them. He walked slowly, greeting each department, asking about their work, and thanking them for their efforts. His warm tone surprised everyone. They had expected someone cold or distant, but he was the opposite, humble and approachable. The air began to feel lighter. Later that day, Daniel called for a company-wide meeting. The large conference hall was full. Even people who rarely attended meetings made sure to be there. Mr. Collins sat in the front row, hands folded tightly, eyes fixed on the floor. He looked smaller somehow, not physically, but in presence. For the first time in years, he didn't have control. When Daniel walked on stage, the room fell silent. The projector behind him showed the company's new logo, a mix of both brands united. He looked around the room and said softly, "I know this moment feels strange for many of you. It does for me too. A few years ago, I stood in this same building under very different circumstances. Back then, I thought my story here had ended. But life has a way of giving us second chances, not to change the past, but to shape the future." The room was silent, but his words reached everyone. Daniel continued, "I don't believe in holding grudges. I believe in learning. This company has a great history, full of talented people who care about what they do. My goal isn't to erase that, it's to build on it, together." A few people started to nod. The tension began to ease. He clicked the next slide. It showed simple, clear goals: innovation, teamwork, and respect. "These are the things I value," he said. "We'll bring in new technology, yes, but more importantly, we'll bring back trust. No one here should feel unheard. Every idea matters." When the meeting ended, the applause came slowly at first, then grew stronger. People clapped not just because he was their new CEO, but because they felt something genuine: hope. They hadn't felt that in a long time. After the meeting, Daniel stayed back to talk with employees one-on-one. Many came up to thank him, some shyly admitting they remembered how unfairly he was treated before. He listened kindly, never blaming anyone. He didn't even mention the day he was fired. It was as if he had erased that chapter completely. Eventually, Collins approached him. He looked uneasy, his usual confident tone replaced by hesitation. "Daniel," he said quietly, "I didn't expect, well, all of this. Congratulations." His voice trembled slightly. Daniel smiled politely. "Thank you, Mr. Collins. I know it must feel strange." Collins nodded, unsure of what else to say. "I suppose things are different now," he murmured. Daniel looked at him steadily. "Yes, they are. But we're all part of this company now. What matters is what we do next. I'm not here to replace people. I'm here to rebuild something stronger." Collins seemed taken aback by Daniel's calmness. He had expected coldness, or maybe even revenge. But instead, he found understanding, something he rarely offered others himself. "I appreciate that," he said softly. "If there's any way I can help, I'm willing to." Daniel nodded. "That's good to hear. Let's work together then." That evening, after everyone had gone home, Daniel stayed behind in his new office. The same building that once made him feel small now felt peaceful. He stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. He thought about how strange life could be, how a single moment of humiliation had led him here. He didn't feel proud in a selfish way. He just felt grateful. Over the next few weeks, Daniel began changing things slowly but thoughtfully. He introduced flexible hours, allowing employees to balance work and life better. He started open meetings where anyone could share ideas. He replaced the old strict communication system with one that encouraged creativity. Slowly, people started smiling more. The atmosphere in the office began to shift. Collins, on the other hand, struggled at first. For years he had led through authority and fear. Now he was surrounded by openness and collaboration. It was new to him. He found it hard to adjust, often staying quiet during meetings. But Daniel noticed. Instead of ignoring him, he started involving Collins in new projects. He gave him responsibilities that matched his strengths: client relations, something Collins had always been good at. At first, Collins thought Daniel was testing him. But over time, he realized Daniel was simply giving him another chance. The kind of chance he had never given Daniel years ago. That thought humbled him. One afternoon, Collins knocked on Daniel's door. "I just wanted to say," he began awkwardly, "I've learned more in these last few weeks than in all my years here. Thank you for not treating me the way I once treated you." Daniel smiled faintly. "We all grow, Mr. Collins. I'm glad you stayed." As the company moved forward, success followed. Under Daniel's leadership, They launched new tools that made teamwork smoother and faster. Clients returned. The profits increased, but more importantly, so did the trust among employees. It was no longer just a workplace. It felt like a community. One day, during a company event, Daniel stood on stage again. He looked around at his team, people laughing, sharing food, and talking freely. It felt unreal. "This," he said quietly to Lena, who stood beside him, "is what I always wanted to build." Lena smiled. "You did more than that. You built a place where people want to stay." Daniel laughed softly. "Then I guess we're doing something right." Later that night, as the event ended, Collins approached him once more. He looked lighter now, less burdened. "I used to think success meant control," Collins said. "But watching how you lead, I realized it's about something else, trust." Daniel nodded. "Trust and respect. That's all people really need to give their best." For the first time, Collins smiled honestly. "You've changed this place, Daniel. I didn't think it was possible." Daniel looked around the room, at the same office that once made him question his worth, now filled with laughter and purpose. "Change is always possible," he said. "It just starts with someone believing it can happen." As he turned off the lights and walked out of the building that night, he paused for a moment at the door. The memory of the day he was fired flashed for just a second. His box of belongings, the stairs, the quiet shame. But this time he felt none of that. He smiled to himself and whispered, "Thank you for letting me go." Because now he understood. Losing that job hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning of everything. Months had passed since Daniel had taken charge as the new CEO, and the company had transformed in ways no one thought possible. The energy in the building was completely different now. People no longer came to work out of fear of losing their jobs. They came because they wanted to. There was laughter in the halls, ideas floating in every conversation, and teamwork that felt genuine. Daniel sat in his office one morning, going through a report. The numbers were strong. Profits had doubled, employee turnover had dropped, and several new projects were already in development. But what made him happiest wasn't the numbers. It was the messages he received from his team. Small thank you notes, ideas, and even jokes pinned on his board. It reminded him of how far they'd all come together. Just then, Lena walked in holding 2 cups of coffee. She placed one on his desk and smiled. "Still working early as usual?" Daniel laughed softly. "You know me. I like quiet mornings." She sat down across from him. "You've done a lot, Daniel. This place feels alive again." He nodded thoughtfully. "It's not just me. Everyone here helped make it happen." Lena smiled. Still humble as ever. Before Daniel could reply, there was a knock at the door. It was Collins. He looked different these days, calmer, more grounded. He wasn't the intimidating manager people used to fear. Instead, he carried himself with quiet respect. "Morning, Daniel," he said, stepping inside. "Good morning," Daniel replied warmly. "How's the new client project going?" "Better than expected," Collins said. "The team's motivated and the client's happy. I wanted to thank you again for trusting me with it." Daniel smiled. "You earned it, Collins." There was a brief silence before Collins said, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what happened before, when you were fired. I can't change what I did, but I want you to know I've learned from it." Daniel looked at him and said gently, "What matters is that you grew from it. Everyone makes mistakes. What defines us is what we do afterward." Collins nodded, his eyes softening. "You taught me that. I used to think leadership was about control, but now I see it's about understanding." Daniel leaned back, smiling. "That's the real difference between a boss and a leader." As Collins left the room, Daniel looked out of the window. The city outside was alive with movement. Cars, people, and endless possibilities. He felt proud, not of his title, but of the journey. Every hard moment, every unfair day had shaped him into the man he was now. He realized that success wasn't about revenge or power. It was about purpose. Later that afternoon, the company held a celebration event to mark 1 year since the merger. The hall was decorated with lights and banners that read, "Together we rise." Employees filled the room, chatting and laughing. Music played softly in the background. Daniel walked in quietly, not wanting any grand attention, but the crowd noticed him immediately. The applause that followed was loud and heartfelt. Someone handed him a microphone. He hesitated for a moment, then smiled and began to speak. When I first came back here, I didn't know how things would go. I had doubts, fears, and memories that weren't easy to forget. But I also had hope. Hope that we could create something better. Looking around this room today, I see that hope turned into reality. He paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. People who once worked under stress and fear, now full of life and pride. We built this together, he continued. We faced challenges, we disagreed, but we never gave up on what truly mattered. Respect. That's what changed everything. The room erupted in applause. Some people even had tears in their eyes. It wasn't just about business success anymore. It was about the journey they'd all shared. After the speeches and laughter, Daniel stepped outside to get some fresh air. The night breeze was cool, and the city lights flickered below. Lena followed him out quietly and stood beside him. You still have that same look, she said. He chuckled. What look? The one you had when you first walked back into this building. The mix of disbelief and purpose, Daniel smiled. I guess some feelings never go away. They stood there for a while, watching the skyline. Then Lena said softly, Do you ever think about that day you got fired? Daniel took a deep breath. Sometimes. But not with anger anymore. I see it differently now. That day forced me to find out who I really was. It was painful, but it was necessary. Lena nodded. Funny how life works, isn't it? He smiled faintly. Yeah. Sometimes what feels like an ending is just a beginning in disguise. The next morning, Daniel received a letter from a young intern. It was handwritten, which was rare these days. The letter read, Dear Mr. Daniel, I just wanted to thank you. I've only been here for a month, but I've learned more about kindness and leadership than I ever did in school. I hope one day I can lead like you. Daniel held the letter for a long moment, a soft smile spreading across his face. It reminded him of when he was in that intern's shoes, uncertain but full of dreams. Now he had become the kind of leader he once wished he'd had. A few weeks later, he was invited to give a talk at a university. He stood before a hall full of young students, sharing his story. Not the version filled with anger or revenge, but one about resilience and forgiveness. He told them how sometimes failure is life's way of preparing you for something greater. The students listened closely, many of them nodding as if his words spoke directly to them. At the end, a student raised his hand and asked, Weren't you ever angry at how unfairly you were treated? Daniel thought for a moment before answering. Of course I was. But anger doesn't build anything. It burns everything around it. What truly builds your future is how you choose to respond. You can let bitterness control you, or you can let it teach you. The students applauded. As Daniel left the hall, a professor walked up to him and said, You've given them something valuable. Real lessons from real life. Daniel smiled. That's all I wanted to do. Back at the office, things continued to grow. The company expanded into new regions, hired more people, and became known for its positive work culture. But even with all the success, Daniel never changed. He still walked through the office every morning, greeting everyone by name, stopping to listen, and offering help whenever needed. Sometimes, when he passed the spot where he once received his termination letter, he would pause for a second, not out of sadness, but as a reminder of how far he'd come. It was a silent thank you to the past that shaped him. One evening, as the sun set and the office emptied, Daniel sat alone in the quiet. He opened his old notebook, the one he used to carry when he was a regular employee. On the last page, he wrote a single line, Never let failure define you. Let it guide you. He closed the notebook and leaned back, feeling peaceful. The story that began with pain had turned into something beautiful. He had built not just a company, but a culture of hope, respect, and second chances. As he turned off the lights and walked out of the office, the security guard at the door smiled and said, Good night, sir. Daniel smiled back. Good night. See you tomorrow. He stepped outside, feeling the cool night air. The city was alive, glowing, full of movement and sound, just like his life now. For a moment, he looked up at the sky and whispered to himself, Everything happens for a reason. And deep down, he knew it was true. Sometimes the best things in life begin right after everything seems to fall apart.